Want to learn about Italian wines in Italy from our expert at Planck Wine Club? Then watch this video. Hey guys, this is Todd with the Wine Club Group. You can find us online at wineclubgroup.com or check out our reviews and ratings of wine clubs at wineclubreviewsandratings.com. Today we're here to talk about Columbus Day and Columbus Day oriented wines. And joining me is our go-to expert for all this wine knowledge, Etty Loewenstein from the delightful, wonderful Planck Wine Club. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Todd. It's great to be with you.
Well, I'm so excited that you're here because you are our go-to wine expert. You know so much, a sommelier, chef, wine enthusiast, educator. Your club is really well known for educating us about different types of wines, uncovering hidden gems, and expanding our palate. So I figured you would be the absolute best person to talk about wines from Italy and Spain. How does that sound for you?
Yes, those are two of my favorite regions in the world, so you've come to the right person.
I knew it. I knew it. Well, awesome. So yeah, again, you know, Columbus Day here is upon us, and we're not going to talk much about the history of Columbus Day because I haven't been, I mean, it may come to you as a bit of a shock, but it's been well over 20 years since high school for me. So the last time I have even discussed or thought about Columbus Day as an historic event has been many, many years ago. But we can at least use this as an excuse to talk about wines, wine culture, and grapes, and the regions of Italy and Spain. So
Absolutely.
So want to drop some knowledge on us.
Absolutely, my pleasure. So which one do we start with, Spain or Italy?
Let's go with Italy.
Okay. That sounds fantastic. I have a particular interest in Italy because I used to live there and I speak Italian, and I'm absolutely obsessed with the wines that come out of Italy. To me, the coolest thing about Italian wines is the sheer amount of indigenous grape varieties that run rampant in that country. You could literally drink all day long, all year long, and every single time taste a different wine from a different region made from a different grape. It's pretty cool and pretty amazing.
I'm no mathematician. That sounds like a lot of drinking.
Yeah. This is not for the faint of heart. Yeah, so the cool thing about Italy, too, is, you know, it's shaped as a boot, and you get a ton of diversity from the north to the south. So in terms of the regions and the grape varieties and the wine styles you see in the north, there's a lot of influence from Germany and Austria and other areas up there. And so the sensibility, and the same thing with the food, actually. And so the foods and the wines from the north are very different than the foods and the wines from the south. In the south, the grape varieties are very different. The terroirs are very different. There's a lot of volcanic soil and volcanic activity. Like, for instance, in the region of Campania, you have Mount Vulture, which is a very cool volcano. It's sort of an old school volcano.
Is this north to south? I'm not familiar.
South, okay. South. This is on like the foot part of the boot, okay, where you have like the toe merges into the heel. You have southern regions like Campania, Puglia, Basilicata, all these areas. I'm sorry, Mount Vulture is actually in Basilicata. But you have all these cool volcanoes that exist down there, and the wines that grow there are very, very different than what you see in the north. So that's just sort of a cool thing about the country. And then you have the whole central region, the Marches, Abruzzo, all that area around Rome, Tuscany. All of those wines are also completely different. So, for instance, you know, we all know Sangiovese, very famous grape from Tuscany. You won't find any Sangiovese, let's say, in Puglia or Basilicata in the south. You also won't find it in the Veneto or in Lombardia in the north. So depending on where you are, the cool thing is that you can sort of drink wines that are local to the place. Whereas in California, let's say, there's, you know, Cabernet grown in a lot of places and Pinot Noir grown in a lot of places. With Europe, both Spain and Italy, the grape varieties are very specific to the region, and they grow well in that region because of the terroir and climatic conditions. So the amount of wind, the amount of heat or cool, the proximity to some kind of landmark like a mountain or a river, and how that affects the climate. So you get a lot of really interesting diversity in both of these countries because of that.
So it's more than just Chianti?
It's more than just Chianti. There's a whole universe. I mean, some of my favorite, particularly favorite varieties out of Italy. Let's just use the south for an example. Are Aglianico, which grows both in Campania and in Basilicata when we're talking about the volcanic soils. Then you have Sicily, which is a completely amazing viticultural region. People are sort of likening Sicily to Burgundy these days in France. And the reason is there is another volcano there called Mount Etna, and they're really cool grapes that are making wines that go into what's called Etna Rosso, red wines from the region of Etna. And one of them is Nerello Mascalese, and the other one is Nerello Cappuccio. So you get some really beautiful, elegant wines, and most people have never heard of these grapes. But they're amazing, and they're really, in terms of the press that the region is getting, they're like really making headlines. Definitely something to look out for the future.
Oh, real nice. Now, is there a lot of white wines coming from Italy as well? Because I know of a lot of red wines, and I think you've actually named a few that I recognize, at least a few of that I recognize, and lots that I don't. But
Absolutely. Italy has incredible white wines, both north, south, and in the center of the country. Some cool white grapes that you might not have heard of, something to explore. There's a white grape from the center of the country, you see most of it in Abruzzo. It's called Pecorino. Most people know the Pecorino cheese. Pecora means sheep in Italian, so there's sort of a relationship there. But the grape has nothing to do with sheep. It just has the same name, and that's a cool indigenous white variety. You also see some cool stuff up north from a grape called, used to be called Tokai. Now it's called Friulano, from the region of Friuli. They had this sort of debate with Tokai that came from Hungary. They didn't want it to be called the same thing. Tokai is a dessert wine made in Hungary that's very famous, quite expensive. And so they had all these legalities to change the name. So now the grape changed from the word Tokai to Friulano, which describes the region where it came from, Friuli. So that's a cool grape. And then in the south, you get all sorts of amazing white grapes. Falanghina from Campania, Greco di Tufo. There's just so many awesome white varieties from all over Italy, but specifically the south, I think, to me is kind of really interesting right now.
So if I'm going to transcribe this interview and try to actually write it down, every one of those Italian words you just said, I'm totally going to have to ask you to spell them.
I'll send you notes.
Right.
The Italian spellings can be a little challenging, but...
So, like, in terms of wine culture, I know that, I visited Spain. I'm sorry, Spain. We're still in Italy right now. I stayed in Milan for like a week or so, and I noticed that, around lunchtime, people would have a glass of wine with their meal, and it was very heavy with pasta and whatever, but it seems like wine is really entrenched in the culture there, just generally speaking.
Absolutely. And I think this holds true for most of Europe, and we'll talk more about this when we get to Spain, but it's the same thing. Wine is like water in Europe. It is part of your staple. It's part of your everyday meal, whether it's lunch, dinner, it's on the table at all times. Wine is not really regarded as like a special occasion kind of thing the way it is in the US. Wine is just part of a meal. And I think that's wonderful. And it's also, it really helps people drink more in moderation too, because it just becomes this everyday usual thing. You have a glass here, you have a glass there. It doesn't need to be, sort of put on this pedestal. You only open wine when you have guests over or when there's a special occasion. And so in terms of heart health too, it's great. People in Italy drink a lot of red wine, but it's really nice. It's nice how pedestrian wine is in their culture, and that it doesn't have to be some highfalutin thing. It's just a great, wonderful accompaniment to whatever you're eating.
So now, is there a couple of really well-known brands, wineries or wines in particular that you might maybe one or two or three that you can come up with at the top of your head that many of us novices might recognize?
Sure. I mean, there are definitely big, large brands that are doing a lot of promotional work and marketing in the U.S. You won't see any of those at the Plonk Wine Club.
Well, that was my next question.
And the reason being is you can find those big brand wines pretty much everywhere. While they may be well made and of a good quality, they don't really have that element of surprise and discovery and adventure that I particularly cherish in the wine drinking experience. So when I do the selections for our clubs, I tend to choose more off the beaten path brands, smaller family owned wineries that to me are a little bit more intriguing than what you see from the big families. But like, for instance, in Tuscany, most people will know the name Antinori, very famous, historic family that's been growing wine for generations, and they make wine in different regions. They've started to have partnerships in the south, but typically they came from Tuscany. And they, and, you know, the interesting thing is that they've been able to diversify, even though they're kind of known for one thing, and they start moving into different areas and, you know, experimenting with different grapes. In addition to Sangiovese, which is like the typical grape of Tuscany, they're also, I'm sure you've heard the term Super Tuscan, which basically means a combination of local grapes from Tuscany that are, you know, part of the traditional appellation law permitted grapes. Sangiovese, Colorino, Ciliegiolo, all these kind of local grapes, but mostly Sangiovese. And then they also include noble varieties from France, like Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, Merlot, Petit Verdot, those kind of grapes. So those blended wines that you see from Tuscany, and Antinori makes them and many others, are referred to as Super Tuscans. So that's kind of cool. And then in terms of other regions that you might, you know, see labels from that are recognizable in the store, Sardinia, which is a cool Italian region. It's an island that we haven't yet talked about. There is a great winery there called Argiolas, Argiolas, that is pretty well known. And they make some great wines, and they make wines from sort of indigenous varieties that grow there that are equivalents of things that you might know. Like, we've all heard of Grenache. In Sardinia, they call Grenache Canonau. So they're sort of like this local dialect name for a grape that we're all pretty familiar with. So it's sort of fun to experiment with those kinds of wines because there's a general level of knowledge as to what you're going to get, something juicy, red fruit, abundant, that kind of thing. But it's called something different there.
Well, that's cool to know. Now, what about, so with Planck Wine Club, do you have any particular favorites of yours that you've either have selected recently or upcoming from Italy in particular?
Yes. Let me think. There are so many. Let's see here. I'm kind of drawing a blank because we've been tasting so many different wines. But
well, it figures I'd have to ask you this like right now after we've been talking about all these different wines.
Yes. Well, yeah. One particular wine that we've shown in the past is a very small winery in Campania in the south called Cacciagalli. They grow organic and biodynamic, and one of the wines we used from them was called Piedi Rosso, which means red feet. Just sort of a funny, I don't know what the history is there, but really...
Lucy grape stomping?
I guess. So that's a very cool indigenous grape variety from the south of Italy that you don't see very often, but it's awesome. It's fabulous. Grown on volcanic soils, pretty smoky, beautiful tannins, really assertive red fruit, really nice. And they also make a great Falanghina, which is another local white grape from that area too. So those are kind of awesome. two fun Italian vines. Yeah.
Well, cool. Thanks so much. Hey, listen, you know what? We're going to have to push our discussion about Spain off to our second segment here because we're running up against the wall here for time. And okay. I do want to give Spain an opportunity to have a little bit of experimentation and discussion as well. So we'll end this talk for now. We'll come back here for part 2 of our Columbus Day discussion with Etty Loewenstein from Planck Wine Club. Thank you so much. Your wine club is highly recommended from us at Wine Club Group, and we really thank you for working with us and joining us here to tell us all about Italian wines.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks. We'll talk soon. Thanks.
Okay. Bye-bye.